All right, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, welcome. This is going to be a quick video overview of a podcast episode that I'd recorded. If you want to check it out, I put it in the, if you're watching this in YouTube, I put it in the description below. If you're not on YouTube, you can go to howtoprogramwithjava.com/session51. And you'll be able to see the podcast episode and the blog post and all that good stuff. As I said, this is sort of going to be a supplement to that podcast episode / blog post. So in this one, I'm going to show you how to set up Hibernate so that it will actually create a table for you from a Java bean, from an actual just plain old Java object. Okay. So what we did in the last episode was we set up our persistence configuration file, which is just a plain old Java file with some annotations and everything like that. And what we're going to do is we're going to take this one step further and go ahead and create our actual, like I said, Java beans, which we will use to create the tables from via Hibernate's functionality. So first thing I'm going to do is create a new package where I'm going to put my actual bean itself. I'm going to say new package. And let me call this one com.howtoprogramwithjava.example, because that's the name of our actual program here. And then I'm going to say, let's call this persistence, I guess. Persistence. Is that a good package name? Sure, why not? And then inside of there, I'm going to put a new class, and I'm going to create a bean. I'm going to call it address book, because that's essentially the scope of this project. We're going to create an address book. So I'm going to create the address book, Java class. And we're going to create this just like we would any other regular old bean that we're going to use, within our application. So I'm just going to go ahead and create an address book. So I'm going to use good design patterns here. I'm going to use data hiding. I'm going to use private instance variables. So I'm going to say private string name, because we need the person's name if they're going to be in an address book. We need their phone number. We need, what else? Their street address. And then let's make it more complex. So they have their address, their city. What else do we have in here? We'll have their postal code or zip code. Let's call it zip code to be American friendly. And then we will have, usually we put like a state or a province. So to be non-American friendly, let's call it region. That's a good generic term to represent either a state or a province. And then we can have a country. So there we go. We have the person's name, number, street address, the city they live in, their zip code, their region, their country. And that is pretty darn good. So we're going to go ahead and do that. And then we're going to create our getters and setters. I'm going to use a shortcut key, Alt-Shift-S. And then I'm going to say, where is it? Generate getters and setters. And I'm just going to go ahead and click on every single one of those and generate the getters and setters for all of those instance variables, just like so. So that's how you would go about creating a typical, plain old Java object as a bean, and that you can use to store all these values via the getter and setter. But that is not good enough yet. We need to extend this to use Hibernate. So there's three key things that you need to remember to do. One is annotate it with the entity annotation. Okay, and I'm going to hover over it and show you where it imports from. You should hopefully import it under the javax.persistence. Okay, that's important. A lot of people mess this up and use the Hibernate annotations, which would potentially and should make sense since we're using Hibernate, but believe it or not, we use the javax.persistence entity import. So do not use the Hibernate one. That will cause issues. So there we go, we've done that. So that's the first step. This is what allows Hibernate. Hibernate will scan the package that these things are in. So I'm actually going to probably have to go and update my package of where it scans if I go to my persistence config. Because I'm just generically saying scan all the packages within the example package. But we can get a little bit more specific and say persistence, right? Because that's the package where we created our address book over here. We create the address book under the example.persistence package, so we can update it there. And it's going to scan the package, which is going to find this address book object within, and it's going to see the @entity annotation, and therefore it knows that I want to create this Java Bean, I want to create it as a table as well. I want to have a sort of mimicking table that is created inside of my database, which will mimic the actual bean itself, which is great. That's exactly what we want to have happen. So that's step number 1, and that's a pretty easy step. Step number 2 is to make sure that since whenever we create a database table, we need to have a primary key for that table, right? That is a standard database rule that we always need to follow. So I'm going to go ahead and create a primary key. I'm going to call it a private long, and I'm just going to call it ID. If you like, you can call it address book ID, if you like. Okay, it's completely up to you. I just tend to be lazy, so I just call it ID because it's nice and easy to do it that way. And then, of course, since we've created an ID instance variable, we need to create our setters and getters. So I'm going to do that real quick. There we go. Created our getters and setters. So, all right, fantastic. But just like we were to create, if we were to create this manually, we need to tell our database which field is the primary key, and if we want to have the primary key values generated for us in any way, shape, or form. Okay, if you're not familiar with all this terminology, I've got some great tutorials on this in my podcast. You should go probably back all the way into the beginning of the database, the introduction to database episodes, which I believe are somewhere around episode probably 42-ish or 43. You can go back and check that out in the How to Program with Java podcast. Okay, so having said that, we've created our ID within our Java Bean, but now we need to annotate it so that Hibernate knows which fields, which variables we want to actually use as our primary key. So it doesn't know that just because it's called ID. You think it might be smart enough because we've named it ID, but it's not. So we need to actually do a little bit more work. The first one is just to annotate it with the @ID annotation. Okay, and I'm going to hover over that and show you where the import comes from. Hurry up, there we go. So again, this comes from the javax.persistence package. I'm going to go ahead and import that. So there we go. We've told it which of the variables we want to set as our ID. Please note that I put this on the getter. Do not, I repeat, do not put it on the setter. Okay, this is incorrect. Do not do this. Hibernate does not scan the setters for these annotations. Put it on the getter. Okay. Another semi-valid location is to put it on the actual, up here on the actual declaration of the variable. But I've actually had issues with doing it that way before. I can't recall exactly what the issue was, but it wasn't playing happy or playing nice with me when I put it up here. So I always just put it on the getters. Okay. Anytime you're using Hibernate annotations on the method level, put it on the getters. Okay. That's pretty much a universal constant. Okay. Having said that, we have one more and one final annotation for getting this set up almost perfectly. It's to tell Hibernate how we want to generate the actual primary keys. Okay, so this here, the @ID annotation, is equivalent to saying when you're creating your table to mark it with the primary key keywords. So that will tell it to make this the primary key. But we have not yet told it how to assign the IDs. Within MySQL, which is the database I'm using, we use something called auto increment. Okay, that's a sort of property that we set on our fields when we're creating it in our database, and that will automatically generate the IDs, which is great. So how do we tell Hibernate to do that? Well, there's an annotation called @generated_value. All right, and we can hover over it, and I'll show you where it comes from. Again, from the same javax.persistence package. Okay, generated value, and there's one more thing we need to do for generated value is to give it the strategy. Okay, so we're going to define the actual strategy that it's going to use, and what I'm going to do here is, I don't know if you saw me do that, I just typed in STRA, and then I hit Control Space, and it sort of finishes the actual word for me. If I don't want to do that, I can hit delete on that and hit Control Space here, and you see that there's two options, the generator and the strategy. Both are optional, but I just like to tell it which strategy to use. So I say strategy equals, and again, I can say Control Space here, and I can get a list of these strategies. There's auto, identity, sequence, and table. I always use auto. Okay, it sort of tells it allows Hibernate to sort of pick the best one, automatically pick the best generation strategy. And when you do it with not Hibernate, when you do that with the MySQL database, it just automatically uses the auto increment generation strategy, which is exactly what we want. Okay, so I'm going to save that, and there we go. We've pretty much done everything we need to do to set up our Hibernate entity object here. So this will actually go and create this object in the database. Now, when I hit the play button, I'm going to start my server up. But when I do that, it's actually not going to work. And I know it's not going to work because at least I believe it shouldn't work. I believe I should see some errors. And that will be expected because I want to prove another point here that you guys may be running into, or a problem that you may run into that's probably going to be common. So I'm going to go ahead and start up my server. And we're going to see as the server starts, hopefully an error. If we don't, then, oh well, that plan backfired. And it looks like it's going to start up correctly, of course. So there you go, it started up correctly. But fair enough. Okay, so let's look at our address book table now that it should have created, right? Because we've done all of our homework. We've done everything we need to have it create that table. So let me go ahead and open up my Toad for MySQL here. And I'm going to take a look at my database. And if I scan through here, these are a bunch of databases that I have sort of set up. I don't see the database listed that I want to have in obviously my list of database or databases. I've identified the database I want to connect to as being the address book database. And in here, I see no address book database. So what the heck is going on? Well, what's happening is you need to actually create that database manually. Okay, that's a step that some people may forget. So whatever database you specified in your properties file, I'll show you my properties file. I've specified it here on my JDBC URL property. If I have created the address book, or rather I've specified address book database as being the actual database I want to connect to, but I haven't created it manually. So I need to go and actually say File, New, create the database, say address book database. Boom. So now that I've created it, I can click on it, and I can select it here as well. But you see that if I refresh this menu here, there's nothing in here. There's no tables in there just yet. And that's because I have not restarted my server. So I'm going to go ahead and restart my server by clicking on the play button again. So that'll shut it down and start it back up. So hopefully now this should start without error. I figured it might have started with an error because it tried to create the table in a database that didn't exist, but it obviously doesn't throw an error, so that could confuse you quite a bit as to why it hadn't created that table. So now I can go back in and I should be able to refresh this item in here now with the address book database being created. And if all goes well, you see that it actually did not create the table. Alrighty, so after some good back and forth and debugging on my end, figuring out why I hadn't created those, or the table, like I thought it would, I realized I had missed something very, very important. And so it's very critical that you guys know to carry out this particular step in the process when you're creating your applications from scratch. There are some important things inside of, I believe, the application config XML file, which is inside of Spring. Again, I'm using Spring in tandem with Hibernate because they both play very well together. But as part of the Spring configuration, as you can see here, they have a way to do a component scan. And now it's either, it might not even be in this one, but we can give this one a shot. You need to make sure you uncomment and, like I said, add your base package here. So the base package for me is going to be, let's see, com.howtoprogramwithjava.example. Okay, so that will scan or initiate the ability for Hibernate and Spring to scan the packages. Now let me give this another start. Let me start with the project again and see if that makes any difference at all in the startup process. And it looks like, see, I have some additional stuff going on inside of my startup. So before we didn't see these sort of black lines of code. These are related to Hibernate. So you see now Hibernate is sort of kicking into gear. So if I go back into my database now and refresh, let's see if that makes a difference. And there you go. So boom, it's created that address book table. So that's a key thing to remember, and I'm going to have to go back and put that in the blog post, is that we need to enable the Spring to actually scan for components. So the first thing we do here is enable it, so we uncomment it here. We add the context component scan. And we need to make sure that we modify our persistence config file to update it with the proper packages to scan as well. Okay, because without this context component scan enabled, it's going to ignore all of our annotations, regardless of which object we're actually looking at. All right. So having said that, I can probably go back now and try and recreate the issue I was looking to create before, which is where the database doesn't exist. So again, I felt like I should have seen an error, but we'll see if I'm correct or not. So I'm going to say drop database address book database. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and run that code, and it said execute successfully. So now I'm going to refresh this, and sure enough, boom, there we go. The database drops away, so now the database does not exist. I want to restart my server and see if I get any sort of error when it's in the startup process if I don't have the database created. Again, I don't know. Oh, it looked like I did get an error there, so let me scroll back up. And sure enough, there is an error, and of course it says unknown database, address book database. So that is the exception I thought I was going to see back when I said I was going to see it, and we didn't. And the reason why we didn't see it was because it wasn't even enabling, or Hibernate wasn't even enabled, because again, we didn't enable it via the application config XML file, and we didn't uncomment our context component scan line, which is a very important line. Again, as part of the set it and forget it lines of code. Once we have it in there once and it's working, then we don't have to worry about it anymore. So there we go. Now I've created that unknown database error, which I was expecting to see. So now we need to go and manually create our database, which is via the file new database, and then we say address book database. Now that we've created it, we should be able to see it in our drop-down list. If my computer is gonna stop being slow. There we go. So now address book database appears, and we can choose it, and sure enough, we have our database in there. Now there's one final step, one final thing that you guys need to know about. It's the naming convention. Right now, the naming convention is not correct. Address book is two separate words, and we are not separating those two words with an underscore. That is incorrect. Also, phone number, street address, and zip code are all two words, and they are not separated by an underscore. That is not correct naming convention for our tables and our columns. So how do we tell Hibernate how to correctly name our tables and our columns? Well, it's actually, you can go to the address book file that we had created already. Again, all we did was add the @entity, the ID, and the generated value annotations. But now we're going to add two more. One is going to be the table annotation, and I'm going to specify the name of the table, which is address underscore book. Okay, and I'm going to import that, which again comes from the Java X persistence package. There we go. So now this is us just telling Hibernate, hey, Hibernate, this is what I want you to name my table. Again, important that you put the table annotation together with the entity at the method or the class level. Okay, this is a class level annotation. I think if you try to put it at the method level or something, it's going to have an error here and say this annotation is disallowed for this location. So there's only one correct place to put it, which is at the class level. Okay, so that fixes the name of the table. If I were to save my file and restart my application, it should drop the existing table and then create a new one with the correct name, if all goes well. Again, nothing ever goes perfectly when you're programming, but let me go ahead and refresh. And there we go. So now we see address book is correct. It has the underscore in it, which is great, but again, we still haven't addressed the phone number, street address, and zip code. So we're going to do those three. So we're going to look at the phone number. And again, we're going to put an annotation at the method level, again, inside of the getter portion. Very important you put it in the getter, not the setter. We're going to put the column annotation and specify the name of this column, which is going to be phone number. So it's unfortunate we need to do this manually, but that's just the name of the game when you have a variable name that is 2 words or longer. Okay, so now let's do it for the street address. Street underscore address. Fantastic. And where was the zip code? Again, for the getter, we put it zip underscore code on the getter for the this particular variable. Okay, so getter on the street address, getter on the phone number, and it will restart my server, and we can go back and refresh this table, and hopefully there we go. So now we see phone underscore number, street underscore address, and zip underscore code. So now we are beautiful, we are good to go. This is exactly what we wanted to see in our setup. I'm very happy with this. Hopefully you've learned something here, and I've learned something here. And I guess I can throw one final little bonus at you if you like. You might notice that when you stop your server, okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop the server and wait till it's actually stopped, and you go back in here and you refresh your table, you might notice that it disappears. Where the heck did my table go? Okay, if you're seeing that, that's most likely because of your properties file. If you go back into your properties file, at the very bottom here, you'll see a create-drop command. When you do this, this is saying at the beginning or the start of your server starting up, it's going to create the tables. And then when you stop your server, it's going to drop the tables. Okay, it's going to drop all the tables. It's going to drop everything. It's going to delete essentially your entire database, or at least the contents within the database itself. Okay, it doesn't delete the database, but the contents within it. If you don't want that to happen, this is useful when you are dealing with a development environment situation. You want to quickly, keep on creating and deleting your tables because maybe you're doing a lot of changes or you're testing specific scenarios and whatnot. It's very useful for that. But when you get into a scenario where you don't want to do that anymore, just replace it with the word update. When you say update, that means that it will create the tables if they're not there, or it will make updates to the table. It will alter the tables if it notices a desynchronization between your Java beans, where you've annotated them with the @entity annotation, and the actual database table itself. Okay, so it'll make changes. So I can show that to you. I can prove that. I can hit the play button to restart my server, and it'll go through everything that it needs to do to restart the server. And it will hopefully create the table. Again, anything can happen when we're doing this live. So there we go, beautiful. It's created the table. Now to prove that it doesn't drop the table, I'm going to stop my server. So this previously, if we had the create-drop property in there, it would have deleted the table. But now let me refresh, and you see the table still exists. Great. Now let me show you the functionality of the update property. If we add another instance variable in here, like let's say email address. Okay, let me scroll down to the bottom and add a getter and setter for the email address. And then since email address is 2 words or more, I'm going to annotate it with the column annotation to set it to email underscore address because I want to make sure the naming convention is correct. Okay, so now we've added email address. What's going to happen? Let me start my server and see what happens. If all goes well, it should notice that there's a desynchronization situation happening between my address book and my database, because remember, my database did not have an email address field. Hopefully it should have detected that. Now, if I scan this, you see email address does not exist, but if I refresh, there we go. It's added email address in there for us. So that's the beauty of the update property. Okay, so there you go. Now I'm done. This is a great video. I try to keep it, short. It looks like it's, almost just past 20 minutes. Guess it's not that short, but hopefully you've learned a ton. And if you are wanting to learn more, by all means, check out howtoprogramwithjava.com. Great resource for learning everything you need to know about Java, as well as databases we've talked about and this Hibernate stuff, as well as the Spring framework. I mean, there's tons and tons and tons of great information within that one beautiful location. Howtoprogramwithjava.com. All right, guys, take care, have fun, and as always, happy learning. Bye for now.